This is SN Studios, and today we're diving deep into the story of a Bradford figure who made his name known in every corner of Bradford. A man feared by many, respected by even more. His name, Amriz Iqbal, better known on the streets as Major. Major came from Barker End area of Bradford. If you were from the BD3 postcode, you probably knew his name, or at least heard whispers about him. He wasn't just another street hustler. He was connected, serious, and not to be messed with. Major was big in the game. He moved serious weight, one of the major suppliers in the city's underworld. But beyond business, he had a reputation. He was known as a fighter, someone who would never back down no matter who was standing in front of him. Now we take you back to March 16th, 2010, to a quiet street in Bradford Moor, where a night of vengeance and violence left one young man dead, and three others facing the consequences. In the early hours of that March morning, 19-year-old Mohammed Rayaib was attacked near his home on the Gladstone Street. What began as a chase through the neighbourhood ended in tragedy. A brutal knife assault that would claim his life. According to court proceedings later reported by the Telegraph and Argus, the attack was led by Mohammed Rohail, aged 23, from Sanford Road, Bradford Moor. Rohail, along with Amriz Iqbal, Major of Curzon Road, and Ibra Sadiq of Fitzroy Road, Barker End, set out that night with two unidentified men. Their intention, prosecutors said, was simple: revenge. Rohail had reportedly been attacked earlier that night, and the group went out looking for those they believed were responsible. As the group spotted Rayaib and his friend, Dilshad Hussain, tensions exploded. The three defendants, Rohail, Major, and Sadiq, chased after Rayaib, while the two unidentified men pursued Hussain. In moments, Gladstone Street turned into the scene of a violent confrontation. Rayaib was stabbed 6 times, one wound piercing his heart. Despite emergency response efforts, he died from his injuries not far from his own doorstep. Months later, the case came before Teesside Crown Court. At first, the accused men had all faced murder charges, but midway through the trial, there was a dramatic turn. Mohammed Rohail changed his plea to guilty of murder, admitting that he had stabbed Rayaib during a struggle after the chase. The Recorder of Middlesbrough, Judge Fox QC, directed the jury to formally find Rohail guilty based on his plea. The courtroom fell silent as the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 12 years to be served before parole could be considered. For Amriz Iqbal and Ibra Sadiq, the outcome was different. They had both admitted to violent disorder, acknowledging their roles in the events of that night, but not the fatal stabbing itself. The court heard that while prosecutors initially sought to prove that Iqbal and Sadiq knew Rohail carried a knife, the basis of Rohail's guilty plea affected their standing. The judge directed the jury to find both men not guilty of murder. Instead, Major and Sadiq were sentenced to 2.5 years in prison each for their part in the violent disorder. After serving around 2.5 years for his part in the 2010 Rayaib murder case, Amriz Iqbal, Major, walked free once again. But freedom didn't mean peace. Within months of his release, tension was already back in the air. One of the first public incidents came when Major got into a fight with Rayaib's older brother, Tabo, at a fuel station in Bradford. It was personal. Old wounds, old rivalries, and unfinished business from a murder that still haunted the city. But even after all that, Major's name still carried weight. He was still a serious figure in Bradford's underworld. He had runners all over the city, young lads moving product, bringing in cash, keeping his name alive on the streets. Major didn't just stay local either. He spent long periods living in Dubai, living large, designer clothes, fast cars, expensive nights out. It was a lavish lifestyle, funded by the same network he had built back home. and Major wasn't alone in his circle. One of the men said to be under his manners was Faiz Rehman, also known as Fuji. Fuji made headlines of his own. He was caught up in a £4.2 million drug conspiracy. And in February 2023, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act, the courts ordered him to hand over his assets, stripping back the fortune built from the operation. For Major, it showed the scale of the world he operated in. Connections reaching from Bradford to Dubai, an influence that ran deep through the city's underbelly. But power like that never comes without consequences. As the years went on, Major's story would only grow darker, and his name would become one that the streets of Bradford would never forget. By this point, Amriz Iqbal, Major, was back in full control. He had the money, he had the cars, and he still had the name that carried weight in every corner of BD3 and beyond. In the years after his release, the streets started to whisper. The same man once respected was now being feared for all the wrong reasons. Some said Major had changed, that he'd become too heavy-handed, too ruthless, and that he was throwing his weight around, making sure everyone remembered him in Bradford. People began to say Major wasn't just respected anymore. He was a bully. He ruled by intimidation. Major had always been serious, nobody questioned that. But his reputation started to divide people. Some said he was just defending what was his. Others said he'd gone too far, that the fear he created had started turning people against him. And then, just before Major's own murder, the word on the street was that there was tension building between Major and another well-known Bradford name, Meggie Khan. Meggie Khan was another Bradford mobster, a man with his own following, his own network. The two of them were cut from the same cloth, respected, connected, and used to get in their own way. But when two dominant forces share the same territory, it's only a matter of time before paths cross and egos collide. The rumours started flying. People on the streets said the two were no longer on good terms. There were arguments, confrontations, and a sense that something big was coming. No one really knew what was said behind closed doors, but the streets talk. It was Wednesday, 3rd October 2018. In the daylight hours of that day, Amriz Iqbal walked through the back streets of Bradford Moor near Sandford Road and Waller Avenue, where friends and family said he often met associates. He'd recently returned from Dubai. Shortly before midnight, a silver Kia Sedona began moving through those same narrow streets. Inside that vehicle, police would later say, were men on a mission of revenge. Moments later, at the junction near Sandford Road, the car rammed directly into Major and his friend Adnan Ahmed. Witnesses heard the sound, a single violent impact followed by shouting and chaos. Residents came running from their houses, lights flicked on, phone cameras shook in the dark. By the time emergency services arrived, both victims were critically injured. Major died at the scene from massive blunt force trauma. The city awoke to blue lights and crime scene tape stretching across the road. Within hours, West Yorkshire Police launched a major inquiry. Detectives from the homicide and major inquiry team collected CCTV from homes, shops, and buses across Bradford Moor, Greengates, and Leeds Road. They analysed mobile phone data, number plate recognition, and interviewed dozens of witnesses. Bit by bit, a picture emerged of planning and coordination, not a street brawl. The silver Kia Sedona became the centre of the puzzle. Through forensic work, investigators linked the car to Meggie Khan and to his associate Tony Grant. Phone data showed the pair had been tracking Major's movements earlier that evening, but detectives soon discovered another clue and another crime. In the early hours following the killing, a petrol station on Whitehall Road in Berkenshaw was broken into and set on fire. The CCTV servers inside that building had stored crucial footage of the Kia Sedona moving through the area before the attack. Forensic teams confirmed that the blaze was deliberate. an arson attack intended to destroy evidence. The man behind it, Salman Ismail, acted on orders to cover the killer's trail. For investigators, this was confirmation. The people responsible weren't acting in panic. They were organized, deliberate, and determined to erase their footprints. Months of work followed. Detectives executed warrants across Bradford, Shipley, and Leeds. By mid-2019, the pieces had come together. Meggie Khan, Tony Grant, and Salman Ismail were arrested and charged with murder, conspiracy, and arson. The arrest of Meggie Khan was headline news. He was well known in Bradford, previously linked to serious organised crime and already under investigation by the National Crime Agency for unexplained wealth. At the time of his arrest, he controlled multiple businesses and was believed to have property worth over £800,000. The trial opened at Bradford Crown Court in spring 2019. The public gallery was packed. Journalists, relatives, and neighbours from Bradford Moor, who'd followed the story since the night of the crash. Prosecutors told the jury that the murder was a planned ambush, that the defendants had armed themselves with a motor vehicle and used it as a weapon. The Kia Sedona, they said, was not an accident waiting to happen. It was a tool of execution. Jurors watched CCTV footage slowed frame by frame, tracking the car as it prowled the back streets before impact. They heard from mobile data experts who mapped out the movements of each defendant. They saw the aftermath of the petrol station fire. Charred walls, melted wiring, the security hard drives destroyed. The prosecution called it a blueprint of organised retaliation. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached its verdicts. Meggie Khan, guilty of murder. Tony Grant, guilty of murder. Salman Ismail, guilty of conspiracy to cause GBH and arson. The judge called it a planned, cold-blooded killing. He told the court, "You brought terror to the streets of Bradford, turning a car into a weapon. You orchestrated an attack that left a man dead and a family shattered." Meggie Khan was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 26 years. Tony Grant also received life, with a minimum of 17 years. Salman Ismail was given 17 years for his part in the cover-up. By 2024, 6 years had passed since the murder of Amriz Iqbal, Major. But even though he was gone, his name still echoed through the streets of Bradford. And in April 2024, that name would once again hit the headlines. At Leeds Crown Court, Major's son, Amriz Iqbal, stood in the dock alongside Amir Hanif. The two were jailed for a combined total of more than 10 years. The story began on November 6, 2023, when police stopped a VW Passat on Castleford Lane in Pontefract. Hanif was behind the wheel. Officers searched the car and quickly realised something wasn't right. An iPhone ringing non-stop was found in the driver's side door. It turned out to be a drugs-line phone, one already on the police radar. They also discovered a key that opened a lockbox containing 234 wraps of crack and heroin, worth more than £2,300. When police searched 20-year-old Amriz Iqbal's home in Bradford, where he lived with his grandparents, they found something far bigger. Inside a locked room, 1.3 kilograms of crack cocaine, 248 grams of cocaine, and 68 grams of heroin. A total street value of £156,000. Both men were arrested, taken in for questioning, but neither said a word. No comment to every question. They were remanded into custody, awaiting trial. It wasn't the first time Amir Hanif had been caught. Just 6 months earlier, in May 2023, he was stopped on the M62. Police searched his car and found a hidden compartment above the sun visor. Inside were 521 wraps of crack cocaine and 152 wraps of heroin, worth £4,730. The court heard how both men were deeply involved in drug supply and despite being only in their 20s, they were already caught up in the same world Major once ruled. In the end, the judge handed down his sentence. Hanif, 6 years in prison. Amriz Iqbal, 4.5 years. This is SN Studios, and this was the story of Amriz Iqbal, Major. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real street stories.